1st, 2024. Attendance has been taken, noting that Councillor Miller is online and Councillor Garneau is unable to make it today. Moving on to the approval of the agenda, can I get a mover and seconder? Councillor Kyle, Mayor Bailey, all those in favor? Perfect, that is carried. Moving on to declaration of pecuniary interest, any of note? Seeing none, if any come up later on, please let us know. We have no delegations, petitions, or presentations, so moving on to adoption of the minutes, can I get a mover and seconder? Councillor Pierce, Councillor Miller, all those in favor? Any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, we'll move on to our staff report. RPT-0527-24 2025 Community Grants Program. Heather.
Thank you, Councillor Oakley. So this is the report just outlining where we came from 2024, what we're looking forward to for 2025. We're not recommending any significant program changes. We are planning to continue with the Brant Community Foundation. I think the work they did in 2024 was a great help, and it helped achieve a lot of the goals we wanted with our grants, more than just the reviews we've done in the past few years before that. So one change from my report is we are looking at opening the grants window in January and closing it at the end of February. So once we have budget approval, then they can begin their adjudication, but it just moves it up in the year a little bit more like we used to do. That used to be more in line with our past windows. So that's the only thing that's changed since we probably are not going to the online application intake this year. We're still looking at options to possibly be able to do that in a partnership mode, so there would be no cost, but we're still investigating that, so that'll play out probably for 2026 grants if it's a go. Other than that, I'm not really recommending any changes to the program or the eligibility criteria. I did put forward a few that we could consider. I think I specifically highlighted some that we may want to consider, one being that they have proper insurance, two, that they be, we can consider if we want to continue with the school and the faith-based organization type grants, but that's entirely up to council's discretion if they want to consider making more criteria or they just want to leave it as we did it last year. We did talk about the ongoing grants. We've had a few discussions about that, and so I did do some research into those. I've outlined where we're at with each of those. I do think the two agricultural societies, if council doesn't want to continue those, or if we want to look at maybe continuing the ongoing but not making them eligible for the grants program, or if we want to say, hey, just apply to the grants for what you need, that's an option that we can do. It's just that came from council's direction in 2022. The other ones, I don't recommend we make any changes to at this point. As I say, Mount Pleasant and St. George have lease agreements that actually do have a time frame, and it was actually a good exercise trying to go through all these agreements and sort out all this and put it into paper as to what we had committed to. Scotland does still need some research. I haven't found the paperwork that speaks specifically to the money piece of it. We did sell them the property, so I'm still digging into that. I'm probably going to have to look at Burford Township records and minutes, and I'm sure at some point there was an agreement. I just don't know if it's on paper or was a verbal agreement. So I tried to find that. I've still got some research to do on that one though before we, but it's up to what committee wants to recommend to council. I just know that there has been talk that there is an agreement. Definitely we sold them the property. I don't find the commitment exactly, but they've been getting, they used to get more money and now they're getting 19. So at the end of the day, the two lease ones, the one we leased to the Mount Pleasant Optimist, and I'm pretty sure that the amount that we're giving them would be less than us trying to operate that facility ourselves. And the other one we lease from the St. George Lions, and that lease agreement's pretty clear on, we have commitments for that, so.
All right, thank you, Heather. Any questions from committee to the report? Councillor Pierce.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Through you to Heather. Just very quickly, and it was, you know, as folks will recall, it was one of my pet peeves with the whole process of people doing incomplete applications. I'm just curious, and one of the things in to be eligible is it says, you know, to complete all the what I can't remember the exact wording, complete all the appropriate sections or relevant sections, however it was. I'm curious if there was any from last year that did not have complete forms, and if so, was the same process taken as the Trains on Time? Was the same process taken as what used to be with us, that we would reach out to them and say, hey, you know what, you haven't got this, and work with them to finish that off? Or are we going to take the stance that, hey, it's not, and I don't mean this in a bad way, it's not rocket science, it's a form to fill out, and if you don't fill it out completely, you're not eligible.
Yep. So for this year, if they'd got their application in early enough, they were doing some reach out if there was things missing. It didn't speak necessarily to like if they submitted a budget and the budget was like a handwritten scratch, like it's submitted is submitted, right? So it didn't necessarily deal with the quality of the submissions, but if there was something missing and they were still in time, they'd be like, hey, you didn't submit a budget, and then they submit a budget. I know there was, I think, 2 organizations that didn't get an application in on time, and they just weren't even considered. I kind of had thought maybe they'd be coming to council, but I haven't heard anybody come back. So when and if we go to this online intake, one of the biggest things with that is that they can't proceed to the next step without having uploaded the right documents. So, I mean, I won't stop them from scanning a blank sheet of paper and uploading it, but they need to actually upload something to move on to the next step before they submit. So that's one thing that'll clean up that piece of it, that it'll be impossible to accidentally submit a incomplete application.
Okay, that sounds good, because like I say, it's one of those that it's always been a pet peeve of mine. You know, it's if you can't take the time to fill out the form completely, then in my mind only, might be others, but in my mind, sorry, you're not eligible. So I'm glad we're going that way, which would and it helps with time as well. Like, you know, calling these people back and having to work with them and then get the back and forth and stuff like that. To me, that shouldn't be happening. So I'm glad we're heading that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pierce. Councillor Miller.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just 4 or 5 questions, very specific. Just as far as the Scotland Optimist part goes, I would just recommend, this is my comment, that if you don't locate that agreement through Mr. Chair to Heather, maybe just do up a new one. You have in the report, like you've obviously identified the key components of what that agreement would look like. Obviously, they can't sell it. We've got first dibs and so on. But that park, I would like to see an agreement. I would like to see it maybe refreshed, updated, simply because that park is just, it's too important to that community to not have it formalized. And at the same time, I don't even know if we've ever seen the numbers for what they spend to maintain the park. We've been at 19,000 for a while. It was more. This report says 23,000. Maybe it's costing them 30,000 to maintain. Maybe it's costing them 10,000. So something like that. Like I say, if you can't find it, I would do something new, just because of the importance of it. That's just my comment on that question. This Councilor Pierce kind of talked on it, but the process. A group submits an application. You said maybe 2026 would go online. So whether we do it for 2025 or 2026, how does a group know that their application has been received? And I'm asking that because we had an issue with Burford Minor Hockey where Mr. Greenwood said he put one in, and knowing him, he probably did, but when they came before council, there was nothing there from Burford Minor Hockey. So how does a group get confirmation that their application has been submitted and it's being reviewed? Do they get an email? Do they get something? First question.
I will have to refresh my memory on how they did it in 2024. I do believe that they were sending out emails to all the groups once they'd received the applications, and it was just being received by email. So I will confirm that and I'll let you know. But yeah, I know that issue with Burford Minor Hockey was the last year that the county had run the grants program.
Yep.
So.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, because a lot of times you do things online and you get a confirmation email saying, you have successfully blah, blah, blah. So maybe they, okay. But at the same time, they should be aware that it's coming or something so that they do know and we don't have that issue again. I know stuff happens, but if we can do stuff to prevent errors. Second question, how do we deal with emergency requests? We open the window January, February, life happens. Something happens somewhere, they need emergency funding. We don't deal with it through this process. They just come before council. Is that how we deal with emergency requests?
Yeah, when I took the report last year to set the 2024 process, we eliminated the emergency grant category. But the idea was that if somebody really needed money and they came forward to council with a request and council wanted to approve that request, that staff would comment on a funding source, and be it contingency or somewhere. If it's a request that council feels is a true emergency that needs to be funded, then we will sort out the funding at the time.
Okay, that's what I thought. And then the last question, in the report, help me with this one, Heather. It's on the page 3 of 6 of your report, page 7 of 10. It says eligibility criteria options that were put forward for consideration for the 2024 program but not adopted included. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So those 8 criteria right now we're telling the grant, the granting organization that anybody that is covered under one of those criteria is not eligible for a grant. Am I reading that right?
No, right now we do not declare them ineligible for these. So they could come and ask for these, and we wouldn't say that they're ineligible off the top. This was stuff, when I did my research, this was some eligibility things that some places were using, but wasn't in line with our historic process. So this was on the table, but these ones specifically were not part of our application last year.
Okay, and should we not? I thought we were okay. So if I look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if I look at the 6th one, it's considering general liability coverage in the amount of $2 million. So they don't have to have that as of today, or if we approve this report. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, correct.
Do you think we should?
I don't know that we need to state a specific number, but I think it may be problematic for us to give money to events or organizations that don't have general liability. I imagine most do, but
like, do we need a motion to get that in there? Is what I'm wondering. And maybe we don't set a dollar amount, but amount that staff considers appropriate. With that.
Yeah, I would suspect that if we're going to change the eligibility, we would just do an motion to amend the main recommendation and add these in. And organizations must carry valid general liability coverage is probably sufficient for now. It's a first step, and it'll quickly suss out if there's organizations out there that don't have any coverage that are coming back to us. So.
Okay, and then last question, Mr. Chair. Do you know, Heather, of any organizations that get money on a, say, regular basis that this would kind of exclude? Or do they, most of them have that?
I imagine for a lot of the other things, this will be a criteria for them to, I imagine this is just standard business for most organizations. Possibly some of, like if there's a community organization that just like ad hoc group that just wants some money for a random event, that might apply. But I imagine most actual organizations need this for some other purpose.
Okay, I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair.
All right, Councilor Pierce.
Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering, would Councilor Miller be willing to put forth that motion to add that one in about the general liability? I'd be happy to second if he is. Remember, we're a different bunch here.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind getting Mr. Chair, the mayor's input on this, because he has more experience than most with the grant application, and I think it's a good idea. This is where I'm at. But at the same time, knowing the county, I do know there's a lot of, semi-formal groups that might not have it. I don't want to exclude them because they don't have it, but maybe at the same time, we as members of council have to protect the best interests of the county. So I'm torn. I just wondered if the mayor had any input on that.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I think it's a good idea, but I think someone will always get left out. There's, as you said, there's funny little fundraisers or gatherings or things you need money for, maybe a one-time shot. They won't have that, and they'll be disqualified from that. So if you wanted to bring it forward, most people would think that was right. You know, I think it's right, but somebody will always be left out.
Just a comment through the chair. Another option maybe is we could ask the question in 2025, but not make it a strict criteria, and maybe get a better sense as to whether that's something that we should be moving forward on, or if there's unforeseen problems with that.
Yeah. Another thing that we've done too, through the chair, is got someone like that, a smaller organization that doesn't have the means to do the insurance piece, to hold hands with somebody else that does. So make it an event associated with. So if they've got a tax number and they've got all the insurance, say at the Women's Institute. Women's Institute used to be very good at that. They would always offer their paperwork to anyone who was just getting started, and then they would run it as an event and put somebody on their board so that they made sure that that what they said they were going to do, they did. But sometimes you can piggyback off someone who is set up. There are those kinds of agencies out there.
Councilor Miller.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, then, so what I'd like to make a motion that and I'd rather a motion, not direction to staff, just so it's on the record, that we ask staff to accumulate the insurance data on these grant requests for 2025, and then report back, and then we can have a better sense of maybe it's not an issue at all. Maybe they all have. Anyways, it just give us more information. So that'll be my motion. Not to request it, but to request that we gather the information for 2025. Seeking the secondary.
Councilor Pierce seconds. And that'll be an amendment to the motion, right? Correct, Councilor Miller? Okay, perfect. Any questions, comments, Councilor Pierce?
Yeah, just a comment on that. Thanks, Councilor Miller, for bringing that up, because you're right. It's not the fact that we want to, as the mayor says, to exclude anybody or anything like that. But at the end of the day, we need to protect ourselves, right? And I think that this is the direction to go. And you know, like we say, maybe they all have it. Who knows, right? So I think this is the right way to go, and just see how it plays out this year, and then make a decision after that. So thanks.
Councilor Kyle.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, through you. And yeah, I'm happy with this suggestion and motion. I think it'll help us to find out if there are groups that are putting forward requests that don't have the insurance. But what it would also do is let us have the opportunity to know who those groups are, and maybe there's some outreach we can do with them. And maybe there's like a little bit of case by case. This request is for something that they don't really need insurance for, but we don't want to exclude them, or vice versa. Maybe it's something we can say, "Ooh, have you thought about insurance for this one?" Because there's some, especially those the little offshoot groups that aren't organized and aren't part of some sort of umbrella organization, who may not have considered something like that. But you don't want to just totally cut them out right from the get-go.
Seeing no other comments, I also would concur with this motion. Yeah, I think as well, sort of on the comments of the little offshoot events. I mean, I think renting most facilities, certainly county facilities, would have to have some form of liability insurance, event insurance for that anyways, which I think would then make you eligible if you're hosting this event. So I think it's a pretty reasonable criteria, but it's good to do the information collecting step. So seeing no further comments, I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? All those opposed? That is carried as the amendment. Now back to any questions to the original report and the motion as amended. Councilor Kyle.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So my question is just about, and I know it came up last year as well, but the kind of that perceived double dipping and how we might want to, or maybe we don't want to address that. Like, so if we look at the ag societies, for example, they're included in the ongoing list, but then it looks like they also received ongoing operating grants, capital grants, one-time utilities, maintenance grants, and event grants. For a total of a lot more than what their ongoing grant is. So, like, is that something we want groups to continue to do? Should we be looking at putting a limit on, like, pick the one grant you want to put in for this year? I don't know. I have a hard time with that. Like, if you need to come to us for multiple streams of grant funding, I think there's a bigger issue that they need to be looking at. I don't know. Just going to throw that out there just to stir the pot a little, I guess.
Just one comment. The ag societies are the only groups under the ongoing that have that, but there are plenty of groups that apply in multiple streams. So it's not, but they're the only ones that have that. The idea was to bring parity to those groups, and then it never quite played out as parity, because even if they hadn't applied, like sometimes groups that are running at the ag society will then ask for an event grant. Part of that is to pay for their rent at the ag society, right? So it's hard to suss out it cleanly exactly, but yeah, I would suspect that any improvements, or even if we like said this is your ongoing grant, but that's your operating. Don't ask for another operating. And if you have a capital need, you have a capital need, and events are events. But I don't know. That's just something to throw out there to think about. Is not giving an operating on top of the ongoing, because that seems like a clear double allocation to me.
Mayor Bailey.
Yeah, through the chair, just a comment. Really, the egg halls, to me, don't even qualify for some things, because they give away as much money as they ask us for. We proudly heard a presentation from the Paris Fairgrounds, was it last year or the year before, where they proudly came and made a delegation and told us how much money they gave to people to help them. And I mean, we gave them that money to help them, and then they helped other people. It's just like the United Way. We have we don't support the United Way because their whole mandate is to help other people. So I'm not sure that I'm convinced that we're doing the ag halls properly. I don't have a better answer. I'm just saying that it seemed strange to hear that someone was giving away all the money they asked us, that they told us they needed to survive. So I'm not sure how that works.
Sorry, that's one of the criteria that I had thrown out there, was that an event or program proceeds must not be redistributed for the benefit of other organizations or individuals. It's not a criteria at the moment. It is something that we could look at that might help address that. But again, might have unintended consequences as well. So,
just a follow-up. I think that if this was adopted, it would turn their world around, because that's what they do. They give away scholarships and programs and stuff like that. So if we're going to consider that eligibility for the first one there, I think a lot of people will be in trouble.
Councilor Miller.
Yeah, I just wondered, is the mayor talking about like the Paris Agricultural Society and the Burford Agricultural Society? Am I hearing that correct?
I'm not really talking about the Burford one, because they've never made a presentation to council and told us what they gave away in bursaries and prize money and awards. Paris came to us and told us what they gave away for one fiscal year, and it was as much or more than what we gave them as a sustainable grant, because they said they needed that to survive, and then they told us what they gave to other people. So I'm not sure how that works. I don't know about Burford. They've never come to council and told us what they've done with the money.
Okay, I just, I'm a member of the Ag Society in Burford. I'm not on the board, but so I do see the financials every year. I get a copy of that, and I can tell you they're not giving anything away. So they rely quite, unfortunately, they rely quite heavily.
Councilor Kyle.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, through you. I think just kind of mulling it over, I I kind of like the idea that Heather maybe suggested that if the ongoing grants are earmarked for operating costs, then that if you want to apply for other grants, okay, but not an operating grant. Like that's the money we're giving you to help you with your operating issues. If you have an event or you have something else going on and you want to put, an application in for that, then that maybe makes sense. I guess it's just kind of the way I view a grant. A grant is for something out of the ordinary. So I always find it a little weird that we do ongoing grants anyways, because why is that not just a budget item? But a grant should be for something exceptional or out of the ordinary that you're doing, not for your operating costs anyways. So if we've got these guys that are getting an ongoing grant, I feel like that should be their operating stuff. And I would assume that the Scotland Optimists and the St. George Lions, the ones that are maintaining those facilities on our behalf and can, to your point, do that a whole lot less expensive than it would cost the county to do that ourselves. That's what they're using that for, is operating. So I would say then that kind of deems the operating grant category maybe ineligible to those groups. Just a thought.
Councillor Pierce, and then I'll jump in after you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we've had many conversations about this subject over the years of grants, and you're right. If I recall some of the conversations, it's almost the two hats, right? You're looking at it as the ones that are applying for the grants, trying to maximize what they can get going, for every possible grant they can get on either side, and then from our side wanting to help these folks out. But I must agree with the mayor. It was an eye opener when the Ag Society come in and went, and to his point, that's what they do. That's part of their I'll call it process, right? Of giving bursaries and stuff like that, which is fantastic. Don't get me wrong, but it's one of those that they could very simply say, oh well, no, it wasn't that money that you gave us that we gave away. It was this money over here, which makes it challenging and some some pretty interesting conversations, so to speak. And I'm trying to recall the conversations that we had over this, and I think we ended up talking ourselves in a circle for many years as to what to do, and there was suggestions on, okay, so maybe we put a cap on the maximum overall somebody can get on grants, or it's either you either go on the operating side or the other side, or you're able to submit one. Again, not sure what the answer is. What I would ask is, when we're in conversations with the grants, Brantford, I can't recall exactly the name of them, but how did they go about that? Like, we're not the only one they divvy up grants for. I would be curious to understand what's their take on it. Are they, these all the different grants they do? Is it just an open season? People can apply for everything they want. I'm not sure. So maybe they're the experts in this. I would be interested to get their take on it as to what they see about this. And again, I'm sure they've given grants away, or maybe they don't. Not sure again, as to those particular operations that give money out, so to speak. So again, like I say, I can recall many conversations over the years about this exact thing, and we always just seem to circle around and keep it as it was, which isn't a bad thing, because we're not we're trying to help out, but it comes a point in time where you get the same coming to the well many times every year. And to Councillor Kyle's point, if we're giving grants every year, an operation grant every year to whomever, and that's what they're saying they need to survive, then maybe they need to, and I'm not specifying any individual, but maybe they need to have an internal look to say, hey, we got a bigger problem with this. If we're relying on that grant, or we're going to go under, maybe something else is wrong, right? But I'd be interested to know what they think about, or the way that they've done them over the years, what their thoughts are on that, if we could.
Heather?
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, because now that they're doing both the city and the county and their own grants, they probably have a much higher perspective of groups that are applying all across the board, or yeah, we'll have some commentary with them about that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So just sort of my own commentary on that, along the lines of what Councillor Kyle was saying, what Councillor Pierce was saying. In regards to these ongoing grants, honestly, most of them to me sound like service agreements. like what we have with other community partnerships. So I'm really curious as to whether or not it's just historically we use them as grants, or if there's a reason why they shouldn't be considered service agreements and we move them under the relevant department, which my apologies to General Manager Met would largely be under his department and his budget, but it seems more appropriate there that they would be budget items for our park department as opposed to under this grant process.
Yeah, the ag societies are different because that was a grants thing. The other three, that's the way I see that when we come to the end of those leases, that will probably set it up. I think the only danger in that is that once they get eaten into just an operating budget, I mean, it becomes invisible and you have no idea and it never gets changed, or it just kind of sits there on the books forever, right? Like nobody looks at it every year. But absolutely, I think once we come to the end of these two leases and we come up with the terms for the next version of those, then it makes sense that it just become an operating budget thing rather than a grants thing. I think it's moved several times through the life of the County of Brant into which budgets have been where, but this is where it ended up. So,
Councillor Pierce.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. If I could just comment on something Heather said there, and it's a very valid point. You know, if we were to do it that way, like she says, it just goes into that budget and gets lost, right? There's no real indication of, you know, let's just hypothetically say we got $100,000 into this budget. Was it all used? Was it maybe 110,000 that was used? Maybe it was 30,000 that was used. And who did it split up? I think we need to. I like the separation of it because it, you know, the overall is coming out of our overall budget, right? The 385 or whatever it is, that's coming out of the budget. We've got that as a line item, and then it's kind of separated there. I think it's a very valid point. I think it would just get lost in there, and there would be no accountability as to where it went, how it went, that sort of thing, right? So that's just my thoughts on that.
Mayor Bailey.
Through the chair to Councillor Miller, maybe because they're listed here, Paris and Burford, sort of, it's exactly the same society. Maybe you should have someone from Burford come and share what you do with your money, and it sounds like it might be very much different than Paris. And it would be nice to see what, as you said, you don't have lots of money and you don't do the things that other societies do. So it would be great to see your financials if we could.
Councillor Miller.
I can certainly make that suggestion. I just, going back to what Councilor Pierce said, you know, some of these groups, you give them money on a constant basis, and yeah, they have no hope of maybe ever running without the grant. They need to maybe look internally. I mean, let's be honest, a lot of things out there wouldn't operate without some kind of government help. A lot of culture things, a lot of art things. These are things that enrich all our lives, but they, for various reasons, they have trouble, you know, carrying themselves financially. And I feel that certainly the Burford Fair is like that. And they do look internally every year. They look internally. How can we do this better? How can we do this better? And I think for the last 5 or 6, maybe 7, maybe longer years, they've always debated, you know, do we even change the date of the fair? Because it's always Thanksgiving weekend, competing with Rockton and Norfolk Fair, and the weather's always just terrible 2 out of the 3 days. So those discussions are ongoing. But like I say, I mean, if you take those away from some groups because they won't carry themselves, I think that's a much, much deeper discussion, because like I said, so many things in our society that, you know, arts, culture, things like that, do rely on, you know, some kind of government help. So, but to the mayor's point, yeah, I can certainly make that suggestion to the fair board.
Thank you, Mayor Bailey.
Yeah, and just for a final point from me, that's very true, Councillor Miller, through the chair. People like Lucy Marco have two grants that they get for the Council of Aging, and that's two $10,000 grants from the city and the county. That's all she gets. She is a one-man band. She knows what she needs, and she got caught up in our before we gave it to the foundation to manage. We did the percentage thing, and she only got, I think, $7,500 or something. We made it right by her at the end of the process, but she was devastated because, I mean, that was something that she just needs that, and it's to pay her and to pay for everything she does. So there's very few of them left, but I mean, it's also time sensitive for someone like Lucy Marco. She's, you know, she's getting older, and I don't know that there's anyone to do what she does when she's not here, or decides to retire. So there are some like that. The nice thing about putting it through the foundation is they know all that. They know how Lucy finances the Council of Aging, and they know stuff like that. So that's where I think all those little things will get caught up. It was just that 1 year where we did the whole percentage thing and gave everyone, I don't know what it was, 75% of what they were asking for or something. And that's fine for everyone who can deal with that. But there's a very small group, very small list of people that need exactly what they asked for to make it. So the foundation will catch that all up, so that won't happen again. Because I felt really badly for Lucy, because she was grateful. She, at the same time she was saying thank you for what you could do for us, she knew that it wasn't enough to do it properly. So hopefully that won't happen again.
Councillor Kyle.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, through you. Yeah, and I'm sympathetic to some of those groups. At the same time, I'm also on a couple of different boards outside of council that are those organizations are heavily reliant on government funding for their main source of revenue. That said, they know and they live by the fact that that money could go away at any time. So they're always working towards how do we make ourselves sustainable without that, in the event that either they cut it back or take it away altogether. And some are in really big trouble if they do. That's for sure. So I definitely am sympathetic to that. I think as far as something like egg societies go, they're also not all created equal. Like to Councillor Miller's point, Burford is in a much different situation than Paris, although as a member of the Paris Egg Society, I can also say that I'm not necessarily supportive of some of the decisions they've made recently. So I would question personally, when they come asking for money, how they got to the point where they would have to ask for money for that thing. So I mean, I guess that's maybe personal bias, but that's also the reason why I like that the foundation is the one that's looking after those decisions and taking that out of our hands, because they can assess that with the objectivity that is necessary. Because yeah, they're not all the same. They all have different budgets and different needs and different things that they're trying to accomplish. But yeah, the double dipping piece does bother me. So I would like to see that streamlined at some point.
Do we have any further discussion specifically on the ongoing grants portion? Seeing none, the committee has mentioned lots about streamlining that process and the Paris Egg Society in specific. Isn't the committee wishing to do anything with that, or just we'll move on? All right, we'll move on. Any further questions to the rest of the recommendation? Seeing none, sorry, Councillor Miller.
Well, it come up, but we took no action on it. So I'll make an amendment. See where it goes. Is that anybody that is receiving an operating grant or an ongoing grant is not allowed to apply for an operating grant, just to prevent that double dipping.
Councillor Cowell seconding. Any discussion on this? Councillor Pierce.
I like the idea, and I like the fact of as we call the double dip. Should we do the same with this as we're doing with the insurance to understand, let's have a look at it this year to see if it happens, or we know what's happening and we know the ones it's happening with, let's just do it?
Any discussion on Councillor Pierce's point here? Councillor Cowell?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, through you, maybe a question for Heather. I think we probably, based on the money we've given away, we know which streams we've assigned those grants for. Like, would we have a way of looking back and saying, okay, this group has gotten an ongoing grant, and then they've also got a grant for this, this, and this over the past couple of years, or is that something we don't necessarily know?
So if we're looking at the ongoing ones, those 5 are the only 5 groups getting an ongoing grant. And the other 3 didn't apply for operating grants in 2024. I don't know if they ever have, but not 2024 anyway. So it would just be those insurance, those one-time insurance, those two little pieces would be the two pieces for the ag societies that would be ineligible for operating grants in 2025.
Councillor Cow?
And just follow up to that, as far as all of our grant recipients, so outside of the ongoing grant, do we have a handle on how many other groups have gotten multiple grants in the same year?
There's a lot. Like a lot have applied for, not like nobody's allowed to apply for like 2 operating grants, but we do have a lot of organizations who apply for operating and an event, or capital and operating. There's a lot of groups that get multiple out of our grant, our 3 categories.
So I'm the ongoing ones are maybe the ones that are maybe the bigger concern, because the ongoing grant I would assume is for operating costs. So then maybe that would deem those ones ineligible for operating, but maybe we leave the rest and just see how it shakes out. And if we find we're getting a lot, then maybe we revisit that again.
Councillor Miller, just to clarify your amendment was to make those that are currently using the ongoing grants ineligible for the operating grants. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Obviously, they can still apply to the other streams, like the capital or whatever else we got.
All right. Any further discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, all in favor of the amendment? All opposed? That is carried. Alrighty, any further discussion on the recommendation? I do have one further question. So, to Heather, so we have in here that in order to apply for the grants, you have to be a registered charity incorporation or non-for-profit, or have a registered charity incorporation not-for-profit number, and or an explanation of how the organization meets the criteria as a non-profit organization. So reading this, then an organization that's not a registered non-for-profit would still be able to apply, but they would have to provide an explanation. First of all, is that understanding correct? And then second of all, do we have data on last year, how many applied through that lens and how many were successful, i.e. organizations that were more casual or newly started up that don't have all that paperwork set up and were able to still get grant funding? Because I had a couple of complaints from a few folks who had events run under us the previous year, and then this year were unable to get funding because they weren't a non-for-profit, but that might have been just a misunderstanding.
So yes, your understanding of that is correct. So if you're a nonprofit group but you're not registered, you haven't done the paperwork, you do just need to say that we don't have any profits and that we're raising the money for this, like those unofficial organizations, right? And they do. I know that we looked through those, and I don't know the exact number. We did talk about a few of those, and they got moved on to the adjudication. Now, it also depends on the quality of the rest of their application as to whether or not they would have actually got money from our grants process in 2024. So if they're not non-for-profit, or they didn't explain that they were non-for-profit or why they were not-for-profit, or something in their application suggested that that they were benefiting from it in a revenue type way, then they would have been ineligible. But if they didn't have to be registered charities or nonprofits for 2024. So
Okay, perfect. That's good to know. I think that'll be a conversation then with a couple of those organizations that felt that they couldn't apply, because I think they would then be covered through this. So that's perfect. All right. Any further last minute questions on the recommendation as it currently sits amended? Seeing none, all those in favor of the recommendation as amended? All opposed, and that is carried. So we'll now move on to communications, of which there are none. Other business, any other business that is relevant at this time from the committee? Seeing none, we don't have it in camera, and our next meeting will, I believe, be at the call of the chair. All right, perfect. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Councillor Pierce, we are